the Just Be Better podcast, where we dive into the stories and strategies behind leadership, personal growth, and professional success. In today's episode, I'm very excited to introduce Joel Onyshuk, a sales leader and a podcast host with an incredible career journey. From his humble beginnings selling knives and cars to leading a company through $1 billion acquisitions, Joel's story is filled with valuable lessons on leadership and sales and scaling businesses. Stick with us because you don't want to miss the insights he shares. So good to have you here, Joel. Could you start by sharing a little bit more about your journey so far?
Absolutely. So Joel Onyshuk, I'm in Florida, US. Been in sales for 18, 19 years now. The majority of that's been in software as a service. And the last several years been in sales leadership at the senior executive level. My life has certainly been in sales from a career perspective, but from a passion perspective, I think you could say that I'm very passionate about the topic of leadership, authenticity, and vulnerability in leadership. I love giving discussions and keynotes and kind of group environments where people can really dive into this topic more deeply. Mm-hmm. And that turned into a podcast, then the Frontline Leadership Podcast that I now do every week. And just talk with senior leaders, senior executives, thought leaders in this space who are passionate about the same topic. And I just really think that great leadership changes organizations. Great leadership is the key, the catalyst to great culture. And we keep on seeing challenges in retention and engagement and profitability and productivity. And we think that throwing greater benefits or better pay is going to solve all our problems. And they might get people in the door, but what keeps people in the door is great leaders coming alongside of them. So that's a little bit about me. If you visited me in Florida, you'd find that I spend a lot of my time on the pickleball court and in the pool, and especially time of year like this when it's 95 degrees and very humid. A lot of times in the pool with a nice cold beverage. So that's a little bit about me.
I'm not gonna lie, when I saw your form that you filled in, I had to Google what pickleball is. I've never heard about this in my whole life, and I was like, "Oh, okay, cool."
It is absolutely the fastest growing sport in the U.S. by far. If you ask, Apple tracks, of course, on their watch all activities, all the sports that people are doing now, and it's now surpassed tennis and golf combined.
Oh wow, that's very fast.
Yeah.
But let's talk about your early career days,
Sure.
Joel. Sales. I'm always very interested in people joining sales as a career. How did you end up in this field?
Well, like almost everyone in the sales profession, I ended up going into sales accidentally. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't the goal or the dream. It was necessity. I was 19 and in college, in large part putting myself through college working, although I had some help as well. But I saw my friends working for $8 an hour on the college campus doing different jobs, and I'm like, man, it's a lot of time to spend working for very little amounts of money. And sure. And I got recruited by Cutco, the knife company, and so I did door-to-door knife sales for a season of my college career, and I found that I could do very well, and in 1 hour make $200-$300 versus $8. And so I went, well, that sounds like a way better use of my time. Like, how many hours or days do my peers have to work to make that kind of money? It was pretty easy to keep on doing that, and that led to a whole host of other jobs down the line. And I never really intended to do it long term. I thought I was going to be a psychologist. I thought I was going to get my PhD or my psychology doctorate, and yet I fell in love with it. And so that led to some car sales, which is the worst job I've ever had. That led to mobile. So I worked for Sprint and AT&T, and that led me to a variety of other jobs, and then ultimately got into software late 20s, and have been in that field ever since.
I've actually grew up on a car sales market because my dad and half of my dad's side's of family owns car selling businesses.
Wow.
So I grew up selling cars from early days, and I don't speak Russian really well, but I can sell a car in Russian.
Mm,
Because Lithuania, when I was growing up, Russia was one of the closest countries and was the biggest market for
yeah.
used cars. So I would disagree that is the most terrible job. It's definitely very challenging, but it's quite exciting.
Well, I will say this. It was terrible because no one trained me and I had no idea what I was doing. And I don't even like cars that much. I'm not passionate
Hmm.
about them. I'm not the guy who's going to wax poetic about the cubic inches of this thing or that thing. So I didn't know what I was doing. And so I think I hated it because I just, it's easy to dislike something when you have no idea
Hmm.
how to actually even do it. And so I lasted like 9 months and I moved on.
Fair enough. I think the one thing that you mentioned that I found very interesting is your interest in psychology at early days, and then hopes to actually go that path. Do you think then you need a lot of psychology in sales, or at least to be successful in sales?
I mean, the easy answer is yes. And I'll explain it this way from a longer perspective. I think my passion for people and my genuine interest in seeing them be better because of my interactions with them is a driving factor behind the success I've had in the business world. So there are two C's, two words with the letter C in front that I train others on, and I try to keep at the forefront of my mind when it comes to sales success. And that is, are you curious and do you care? If you're not curious, genuinely curious about someone else, if you're not genuinely curious about their business, genuinely curious about what they're trying to accomplish, what they've tried so far, what things have worked, what things have failed, you're not going to ask good questions. And we tend to overthink questions a lot. And it's important to have scripts, and it's important to have discovery questions and all those things. But if you're actually genuinely curious, it'll guide in large part the way you interact with someone else. And it'll be obvious to that individual that you're not using them. You're not just going through a process, but they actually are genuinely interested. But you also can only be genuinely interested if you care. And if I'm only doing this because I want to use you for my next commission check, if I'm only doing this because I have a number to meet, if I'm not doing it because I genuinely want to leave you better than I found you, which is a philosophy I hold to, you're not going to be as successful as you could be. So I think it's a limiting factor for a lot of salespeople is they get into it just for the money, which is important. The money needs to be a motivating factor in that career. But unless you're curious and unless you truly care, you can't be as successful as you could be. And I think that background in psychology, that desire to go into marriage and family therapy, that desire to go into the hospital psychology setting to help those who are mentally ill, all the things I was considering at the time in my collegiate experience informed the way I ask questions and informed the way I genuinely am curious and care.
And during your career, obviously 18 years is a long time. What is the most memorable sale you ever done and why?
So I won't name the company, but it was a large meat manufacturer. I was in the manufacturing space selling manufacturing software. And it was the first time I had ever seen 5 figures on a commission check. And
That's a motivation on its own.
it is. And I just remember going like, I actually am good at this. Like I'm actually like at that point I had, 10 years or so, but it would have been lower end SMB or retail sales environments. And I didn't have that swagger and the confidence of like, oh, like I'm actually good at this job and I actually have a future doing this long term. I still felt I had imposter syndrome. And I remember going, I just spent 2 days with a customer. And I just made 12 grand or something like that. And going, oh, like this opens up the rest of my life to the potential of, I grew up in a very low middle class household. We had everything we needed, but it wasn't like we had, extravagance or all the toys or bells and whistles. And those things don't motivate me anyway. But it made me go, oh, I don't have to go back to that again. And for my family moving forward, like I see a future where I can provide for them in a way where they have all their needs met and more. And it just gave me a lot of confidence and a lot of excitement for the future. And so it wasn't like a monumental moment. It was just that realization for me, I guess, that makes it memorable, that like I'm in a position now that no one in my lineage, my family history has ever really been, to hopefully change the course of my own kids and their generations to come.
And I think it also could be, as you said, you had an imposter syndrome, which is very common trait probably among people in the early days of their career. Having and seeing that huge number on the paycheck, it definitely can help you mentally to prepare for the future challenges, I think, as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And then so you started selling cars, then knives, then going to a SaaS company. And I know that you've grown one of the companies from early stage to 1 billion acquisition and unicorn. Tell us a little bit more of how this success came about.
Yeah, so actually that's the company I was just referring to in the manufacturing industry. So I joined them when we were about 7 million in revenue, and 6 years later they sold for $1 billion. And so that was quite the experience. And working alongside the owners of that company, and going through the process of being a nobody. No one knows who you are. You're just trying to be scrappy and sell everything you can, to being the most in-demand solution in that space at a global level. It's a pretty remarkable path to take. And the things you learn, you're basically working for 3 or 4 different companies. The company you are when you're 7 million in revenue, the company you are when you're 20 million in revenue, the company you are when you're 50 million and 75 million and 100 million in revenue are totally different companies. The challenges are different. The product is different. The processes are different. The hiring strategies are different. The expansion efforts are different. I mean, everything is different every step of the way. And so it was a master class, a master's degree of getting to know how to do that in a way that I couldn't have paid for. I mean, yes, I got paid well during that time and I enjoyed my time, but it was, I still call it the most formative role I've ever had that set me on a trajectory to, I think, do some pretty fun stuff later on. I remember I was just telling this story last week. I remember I was in my car, this company car, because I had a region that I was selling body shop software into at the time. I remember sitting in the car and getting the phone call from the recruiter saying, "You got the job." And I remember thinking to myself, and I maybe even said it out loud, but that this changes everything. Because I knew that if I succeeded at this job with this company, the rest of my life was going to look completely different. And it's rung true. So it was pretty fun to run through that process for those several years.
What would you say are the main traits that people need to have to succeed in such a jobs? Because obviously, as you mentioned, you had 4 different jobs within the same company, different environments of a jobs, and you had different traits and have to deal with a lot of ambiguity. But what traits did you have that made you that successful?
Well, I think you pointed one out when you said ambiguity. Like the ability to deal with ambiguity and find clarity through ambiguity, I think is important, right? It's easy to sit with a problem in front of you and not have an obvious solution and feel anxious or frustrated or give up. Whereas in that environment, I think most of us learned that you have to solve it. There isn't an option. You're going to solve it. And so when you look at every problem as actually solvable versus finding them to be overwhelming, I think that's it's a critical factor to embrace. I think some other things that for me were important was the willingness to own my role and to not wait for someone else to tell me what to do, but to go, I know what I need to accomplish and I'm just going to go. Right? I'm going to do it. I'm not going to ask for permission. I'll ask for forgiveness later on if I screw up. But that wasn't just me. That was the environment I was put in. Like that was the leaders I worked for. They gave me a lot of flexibility and I ran with that. But unless you own your job, have a CEO mindset of your responsibilities and go, I am in charge of this outcome. No matter how I get there, it has to happen. Unless you have that mindset, it's hard to succeed in that environment because your hands are open waiting for someone to tell you what to do instead of just going and figuring it out. So that we had a philosophy or a mentality of we hire people who get it done. That was how we looked at the people we hired. Are these people trustworthy to get it done? Even if they don't know how to do it or what to do, they're going to go figure it out. They're going to find their peers. They're going to find people in other departments. They're going to ask other customers. They're going to figure it out and it's going to get done. And that was a major learning for me.
And when I love that you brought the hiring into this conversation. It's my favorite topic. When you were hiring people, obviously you were hiring at different stages of the company.
Yeah.
Do you think when the stage of the company changes, the characteristic that people need to bring to the table changes as well? Or is it more on the skills or is it personal traits? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there are certainly things that have to exist in an individual when you're a $7 million company versus a $50 million company or a $75 million company. The openness and willingness to flourish amidst ambiguity when you're a small company to embrace the lack of processes, to be willing and excited by the utter flexibility you have to figure it out and not have a book of processes to turn to and go, what do I need to do next? Turn to page 23 of my manual of how to do my job. That's a different person in many regards than the person when you're a $100 million company. You've got 10, 15 years of runway behind you. You've gotten the processes figured out and you're just plugging someone into a proven system. You certainly could still find incredible benefit from hiring the same person you did when you were a $10 million company at a $100 million stage, but it doesn't require the same level of flexibility and willingness to embrace that ambiguity at that stage. So some people flourish. I've learned over time, some people flourish and get very excited when they say, here's your goal, now figure it out. And some people panic and freak out when they don't have the hand holding, they don't have the playbook. And so, yeah, I think it changes over time. But the character, the integrity, the work ethic, the desire to win, the team player, one team mentality, the desire to overcome obstacles, those things I think you find as ubiquitous over time. I don't think they ever go away.
I see quite often from both sides, from candidate perspective, when they get very excited about the possibility of the company and they want to run away from a big corporate environment into a startup, and they then jump in and it's like, oh, what's my goals? What's my KPI? What do I do? Where I go? And you see that freak out. But at the same time, I see startups being created by founders who are coming from these big organizations. Yeah. And they do have mentality of a corporate manager that's, we need the processes, we need everything. And then they want to bring people from startups and they come in as like, what's happening? So I think it has to be a very leveled understanding of what level of the company is now and where we're going and what people we need. Because if it doesn't match, it's going to be a big chaos on every single side, I think.
I totally agree.
And looking at what point did you, in your career, did you realize that leadership and being a leader is part of your character? Is it something that you enjoy doing and helping people and mentoring people?
So again, same role. I had the privilege of being on the manufacturing shop floor of well over 100 manufacturing companies and manufacturing plants. And those are tough environments. It's tough to motivate a minimum wage worker on a shop floor in a meat manufacturing plant, for example, where all they're doing is with a sharp knife and some protective gear, trimming meat by hand for 8-10 hours a day, every day, all year long. That's a hard environment to increase productivity, increase efficiency, increase motivation, increase retention, increase engagement, all those things. And yet, although our technology at the time was so engaging and capable of improving those metrics, the secret sauce for what we were doing was actually the way we upskilled local supervisors and managers. To give them the tools to keep their teams accountable, to motivate them, to reward and recognize the behaviors that we wanted to see. And so it was obvious to me during that time just how low I had placed the importance of leadership, not as a philosophy, but as a game-changing outcome driver. I think I viewed leadership and management very similar at the time, and I now recognize that they're completely different. You can be a manager, not be a leader. You can be a leader, not be a good manager. And so that set me on a course to find a lot of passion in going, all right, if this is so important in this manufacturing setting, how important is it in every other setting? And I knew it was intuitively, but I wanted to learn that. I wanted to hear about it. And that's what caused me to then launch the podcast. It's been a joy to hear from healthcare executives and from retail executives and from manufacturing executives and many, many other industries, the things that they are doing every day that are dramatically improving their company culture and their outcomes from a leadership perspective. And then going, okay, I'm 80, 90 episodes into my podcast, 80, 90 guests. How many, that's hours, that's weeks of conversations with senior executives who normally I wouldn't get to rub shoulders with at a daily level. How much better can I be now at myself as a leader with their influence? And there's just something special about that conversation versus reading it in a book or learning about it in an MBA.
Do you think it's important for people to get a university degree or follow the very traditional path that a lot of companies still expect? If not, I know in my opinion, you're a perfect example of that. But how else people can learn to be as good as you are?
Well, I'm not sure how good I am. I think I've learned a lot, but I think anyone can do what I've done. I don't think I'm special in that regard. I've just worked hard and I've had opportunities given to me. But I think that leads me to my point that I would use to answer your question. I think that the university experience is decreasing in its efficacy and importance significantly, especially when you look at the dollar spend for your annual tuition and your room and board or whatever it may be. It is unbelievable to me that someone would go and spend $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year to go become a grade school teacher. Why on earth would anyone do that? Now, I recognize there are some things that are required. You do need to go to medical school to cut someone open and do surgery. That probably makes sense. But for non-specialized degrees, or non-specialized career fields, rather, sales, for example, marketing, I believe, can fall into this category. I think there are a lot of things that are not requiring that degree where you could actually learn just as well, if not better, in a mentorship or a apprenticeship environment, where you could be hired at 18 years old and shadow, a marketing team, learn what they're doing, maybe get paid nothing, but also not pay anything either. You're not going into the hole. You're not spending $100,000, $200,000 over 4 years. You're coming out even. But learning all the skills, learning all those things, and contextually learning those things, not learning them in a classroom at 8 a.m. when you just partied until 2 a.m. and you're tired and your eyes are droopy and you're just learning to prove what you know on a test and you're not implementing a single thing for another 3-4 years. Maybe if you put someone in an environment where they're seeing the context of why it's important what they're learning and seeing the real life application of those things, I think that could be much more effective. So it's not like the college experience is universally irrelevant anymore, but I think that it's losing its importance, especially in the tech field. I think you can learn a lot without having to go through that world.
I also think that the world nowadays changes a little bit too quickly for university to stay relevant in some fields. And I still remember, I graduated a decade ago. Damn, that's a long time ago. I graduated a decade ago, and even then, when I was learning some of the things, some of the theoretical parts, my professor at one point said, "This is something that you will never see again in the future because that's not how world works anymore." And it's like, I have an exam that I have to read 3 books for to prepare for this. Is like, what's the point if it's? I understand if I studied history, I studied finance.
Right.
Like I didn't need to know something that I will never use in my life. I needed something that I'm going to be using in my daily life, like probably taxes. That would have been much better topic to study than something that's not happening. But that was just very random question that I had a lot of thought on that, and I'm always arguing about this with people.
Well, Vicky, you bring up a really good point, and maybe you didn't realize you did, but especially now with the nature of AI and its capabilities expanding at incredible rates, what does the future of work look like when the things that think about, maybe when you were a kid, your parents told you you needed to learn your math and to do long division because you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket.
Yep.
I have a calculator in my pocket every day. I have the world's knowledge in my pocket every single day. So the question becomes, if the world's knowledge was available to you in seconds, if you could find out how to, if you could ask ChatGPT, which you can, explain to me the theory of relativity as if I'm a 12-year-old, and it will do that. And you can learn and you can have all this knowledge and then apply it rapidly. What does the future of work look like? What does the future of humanity look like? What are the skills that we should be teaching that university no longer is relevant to teach? And I think that we should take a hard look at the future of finance. What does a finance executive, a finance leader look like when they can have an AI program do their entire, balance their books for the end of August in 10 seconds rather than hiring a whole team to do that? What does that free them to now do? And what does that allow them to focus on differently in the future that they don't have to worry or they don't have time to do now? I think that has application to every field. And I think it's going to be really interesting in the next 5-10 years, especially in the future beyond that. The shakeup of careers, even in sales, the conversation is obviously relevant to what does a salesperson look like when the customer has every ounce of knowledge at their fingertips on the internet to research what they want, and you're the last person they talk to before they buy, not the first person.
Talking about advancement and technologies, what skills and traits do you think still going to remain relevant in the future?
Yeah,
it's a $1 million question, probably.
So I've thought about this a good amount, and I've talked about this on my own podcast quite a bit, and especially with kids. And in the future, I can see my daughter in the living room watching TV while I do this. What are the things that I want them to know? And I think the things that I care most, I don't have a good answer for you yet, but I think at the bare minimum, I believe that the future of work must include strong communication and leadership skills. If we can't communicate powerfully and move minds and inspire others, if we can't move people from one place of existence into another in a way that is transformative, is powerful, it leads to incredible outcome. If we don't have those skills, our value to the workplace is going to diminish greatly. Because I can automate someone to go in and flip burgers with a robot. Mm-hmm. I can I can eliminate many people from the workforce or fill the gaps where I don't have people in the workforce with automation and with technology. But what I can't automate is genuine communication and interpersonal connection that leads to the betterment of individuals. And I think when if you go to an airport, I'm in airports a lot. If you look across the entire space, the sea of people, what you'll see is faces and phones for hours and hours and hours. Very little communication face to face. Very little dialogue, even when you're sitting next to your loved one. Very little dialogue when you're sitting next to your coworker or your boss. We're face in phone, face in technology. And listen, I live on my phone. I get it. However, that's only going to get worse over time. And so when that happens and you have a whole generation of 8, 10, 15-year-olds growing up with that environment and they become 20, 30-year-olds, how effective are they going to be in speaking face-to-face like you and I are right now and inspiring and motivating and moving another person the way they need to go and create a better world? I don't think they're going to be very effective if we're not teaching those skills. And I think that remains the area of the greatest focus and passion for me.
I think in general, communication is such a undervalued but such an important skill to have. At the moment, half of the world is struggling with the loneliness pandemic. Yes. Because we are constantly in our phones, we are constantly engaging with ourselves essentially, and ChatGPTs and Google, which is going to be even worse when it comes in the future. So I think one thing that I probably would add that came to my mind while you were talking is empathy, is actually trying not only to communicate, but learn how to understand others as well. Because that's one thing that I can't imagine a ChatGPT or a robot actually learning at any point. At least I'm hopeful they will.
Absolutely agree. And when I said leadership, I think underneath the banner of leadership are so many things, and that includes empathy. And I totally agree with you. I lost my father last fall, and when he died, I don't need to request time off from an automated AI robotic technology wizard that I can log in online and say, my father died, I need some time. And it goes, great job, Joel. Talk to you soon. Enjoy your time, or even in a very human way, tell me, so sorry to hear that. Take whatever time you need. Who cares if that's an automated robot, chatbot telling me that? I feel no better. But when my boss hops on a Zoom call and looks me in the eyes and tells me his story of his parents, and he was just about to go through loss as well, and all these different things, I feel that human connection and that empathy. And you're right, we cannot replicate that with technology in a way that's meaningful.
Really sorry to hear about your father.
Oh, thanks. No, I appreciate that. It's almost been a year now. I'm all right, but I do appreciate that. Thank you.
I think one thing that I found very interesting at what you said as well, and it's a mix between the question about the current situation and the future. How would you describe your leadership philosophy now? And do you think it will have to somehow change and adapt for the future?
It's funny. I was just on a podcast, the Evolve podcast. I highly recommend you check it out. Carolyn Swara is the host. She's an author and incredible person. We talked about this actually. I would not have said this a year ago, but my thoughts around this topic have transformed a bit into the direction of facilitation. A great leader facilitates the conversation and teamwork of other individuals to figure out and solve a problem and move forward as a team. It's especially back to our conversation around AI and technology and all this stuff. It's no longer like it was even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where the leader or the manager just knew more than their teams that they led. It's like, I could go back to my boss and go, I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. Or I don't know the answer to this question. Tell me the answer. Show me how to get to the answer. Yes, those conversations will still happen, but I believe they'll happen far, far less because of the proliferation of information and contextual abilities to figure out the solutions to problems on your own with technology that we've never had before until now at this level. I think it's no longer the leaders or managers' job to have all the answers when their teams are going to have most of those answers themselves. Again, back to the phone, when the world's knowledge is in your pocket, it's not about knowledge. It's about wisdom, contextualizing that knowledge and knowing what to do with it. And I think that's where leadership and that's where management can flourish. That I've gone before you, I've done this job, I have the context, I know how this is going to go. Let me walk you through this so you avoid the pitfalls, the traps. I think that wisdom is important. And secondarily, I think seeing your role as that of facilitator is important. So team, we have this problem. We need to increase revenue by 25% next quarter. I don't actually know how we're going to do that. It's not my job to know all the answers. It's my job to gather, back to hiring practices, to hire the right people and to then to gather those people into the room or into the virtual room on Zoom over time and solve that problem together. To go, I've hired you for these specific reasons. We have a full, robust, well-balanced team based on all these skill sets. What do we need to do? And then to facilitate that conversation to drive that outcome. I think that is the skill set of a leader of the future. It's the skill set of a good leader now, but that skill set is only going to increase in its efficacy and importance, I think, in decades to come.
And one thing that you briefly mentioned in your form that I asked you to fill, which I was very curious on your definition of that you speak on topics of vulnerable and authentic leadership. What does vulnerability looks like in a leader?
Yeah. So without going academic, which I'm sure we certainly could, I mean, there's a lot of academics and scientists out there who've done a lot of research. Brene Brown is first and foremost the person who would be the expert on that question. If I was going to contextually answer that in a very personal way, I think that vulnerable leadership looks like a leader who is confident in who they are and is willing to show who they are, good and bad, to those around them in a constructive way. So, for example, I don't need to hide. As a vulnerable leader, I don't need to hide that I'm bad at certain things. A leader who struggles with vulnerability may place walls up and not want to talk about those things. They're nervous. They feel inferior. They have nervousness about that gap. But a vulnerable leader is like, I'm not good at everything. And that one thing I'm not good at over here, I'm going to find someone who fills that gap on my team and can help me. Or I'm going to find someone in my sphere of influence or the other leaders in the company to fill that gap for me. A vulnerable leader is okay with opening up their soul or opening up portions of who they are to those who they lead when and talk about things that are painful or difficult for the sake of that person's betterment, not for the sake of word vomiting about themselves and inappropriately laying things on their team that aren't helpful or constructive. But for example, when I see a team member struggling to sell and they're having a bad quarter, maybe bad half a year, a leader who's not vulnerable might lean on performance plans as their first and foremost, thing to turn to, motivate them with a stick and going like, hey, you better shape up or you're going to ship you out. And we're going to figure out something to do without you if you can't figure out how to hit your numbers, blah, 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 blah. A vulnerable leader will go, boy, Vicky, I remember in 2016, I was the golden boy selling. So I was the best salesperson in the company I was working for 3 years running. And then for the first half of that year, I sold nothing. And I was like, did I lose it? Did I ever have it? Have I gotten lucky up to this point in my career? do I suck at my job? I had so many doubts and fears and concerns and worries. I was worried about my job. I was worried about my family. How are you feeling? I can only imagine what's going through your head right now because you've done so well. What's going on in your life? Talk to me about what's happening because I can't imagine that you're feeling great about this right now. And just talk to me as a human being, right? That's a very different question, very different conversation. And you're not trying to pull this answer out of someone without context. You're eliciting a conversation by first letting your own guard down, contextualizing your own challenges in this area, making them feel safe, and allowing them to breathe and go, I'm okay sharing the actual reality of what I'm going through right now, human to human, not just boss to employee. So that's an example, I think, of what vulnerable leadership looks like. You're sharing your weaknesses or you're sharing your deficits for the sake of another in a constructive way that moves them forward, I think is a really important thing to embrace.
And do you think it's possible to overcome, as in your example, the underperformance through effective leadership? And at what point do you have to go as like, okay, leadership is not helping here. Like we need to say goodbye to each other.
My answer to you is probably not going to be received well by everyone. But I truly believe that if I have a team member failing to deliver on their job, that's my fault. It's my fault. Either I hired them and did not train them well, did not resource them well, did not onboard them well, or I just hired the wrong person for this job. Like that's a reality. That's my fault. If they used to be good at their job and they're no longer anymore, and I don't know why, and I'm not coming alongside them to help them figure it out, and I'm not successful in that, that's my fault. If the company has changed, and to your point earlier, from a company that's 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, and the skill set that person has is no longer relevant for the job they have, and I've kept them in it, I haven't found somewhere else for them to go, I haven't figured out a way to leverage their passion for the company and the history they have here and the context they carry every day of how we got here and where we're going, I haven't put them somewhere else where they can be helpful and useful, that's my fault, right? So I truly believe that the failure of any individual team member is many times the failure of that leader. Now, there are also contexts in life where an individual can just make bad choices. I can't, be responsible for every choice my individual employee makes. However, over time, if I don't address those things, if I'm not coming alongside of them, I'm not trying to help them overcome those things in every way I possibly can, that is my fault. And so, generally speaking, Vicky, I would say that the failure of individuals and failure of teams generally comes down to a lack of leadership. There are, of course, exceptions, but I think we need to embrace that reality. And if we're not, we're missing out on a lot of responsibility that we should be taking.
I'll join on your unpopular opinion because I completely agree. And I think that's one of the things that it takes a little while to understand when you become a new manager, that you're successful only if your team's successful. And if your team fails, you fail first. It's one of the things like that's part of a job as a manager. But I think it really nicely resonates with what you said earlier about being vulnerable leader. Because if you're a vulnerable leader, you will be able to say, like, look, guys, I messed up. This is my fault that you're not here. And we all humans, that's what separates us from robots nowadays. We are allowed to make mistakes and it's completely fine. But it's just the part of strong leader to actually admit that it's my fault. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
And I know that you give keynote speeches on leadership as well. I assume that's why you spend a lot of time traveling. What topics do you find most resonates with your audience?
Well, I mean, the travel has been, I've been in sales for years, so I travel a lot for my customers. But, the topic of vulnerable leadership, for me, the keynote that I think about the most is the one that I've titled The Risk Worth Taking. And the risk worth taking is the topic of vulnerable leadership and how risky it does feel and how open and vulnerable, right? Like it is for us to be laid bare to a certain degree in front of another. And taking that risk, having that conversation, saying that thing, coming towards someone else in that manner it feels very dangerous, feels very risky, feels scary. And yet the topic of that keynote, and obviously it's an hour long, so I can't describe it in 1 minute, but the topic of that keynote basically goes, this is the risk worth taking. These are the benefits to becoming a vulnerable leader. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Gallup Q12 survey items, but For those who are listening who aren't, Gallup has done a tremendous job of boiling down over 3.3 million individuals across 100,000 plus teams. What are the 12 items that correspond with fully engaged employees? And there are some things that are basic, like, do you know what's expected of you at your work? And do you have the things you need to do your job right? But then there's a whole chunk of those 12 that come down to a leader and their efficacy, their ability to lead well. And I truly believe that much of it boils down to that leader being vulnerable and real and authentic. And so I won't go through those items now. I'd be happy to, obviously speak on that for anyone who wants to hear it or have a deeper conversation. But in order to get the most out of your people, in order to get the most out of a team, you need to be human and vulnerable. And it's a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. And that I think is the purpose of that keynote.
And why do you think it resonates with people so much?
I think because intuitively we know it's true. I think intuitively we've experienced that sort of vulnerability in our lives from others. And those are the moments that we feel the most encouraged, the most empowered. And yet it happens way less than it should. I respect, but I look back at the leaders in my life, the people who I've admired, and the ones that I admire the most are the ones who are willing to say they don't know the answer to something, but they're trying to figure it out. They're striving alongside of me in the challenges of life to better themselves, to become the best version of themselves. It's the ones who posture as if they have it all figured out. The ones who posture as if, they're better than you, and based on their title or the number of years they've lived on this earth, that they have innate worth or value that's above you. That's not the sort of person you want to emulate or the sort of person that you want to learn from. And that doesn't encourage you to become the best version of yourself. So I think that it resonates because we're all desperately looking to be told that we're okay. We're all desperately looking for someone to tell us that the way you are right now, I accept you and I love you and I care about you for who you are now. But I also care about you and love you enough to not leave you there. That I'm going to take you with me and help you become the best version of yourselves. And we want that from our parents, we want that from our friends, and we desperately want that from our bosses at work or anywhere else in our lives.
I think it's quite a common theme and very well-known knowledge, but it's not that widely accepted probably, that people don't go for a job, people go for a leader. And I know you talk a little bit on that as well. So if you give an advice for someone looking to go through a career change or first job, how would you personally choose the job? What criteria would be the most important for yourself?
Mm-hmm. There are 4 criteria that I would use. Now, again, keep in mind that I'm also coming out of a startup world, startup mentality. It's the world I've lived in for quite a while. However, I think they are still timeless principles that transcend that environment. If I was early in my career, I would be looking for, first and foremost, as you mentioned, Vicky, a great boss, a great leader to work for, someone who is willing to mentor, someone who's willing to provide me the context of how to be successful, someone who's willing to be honest and open and vulnerable, right? If I was being interviewed by a boss at 21 years old and my boss is 28 and, was a manager or whatever above me, and I asked them the question of what's hard about working here? Or I asked them a question about what's the most frustrating thing about your job? Or something along those lines, and they're not willing to answer me honestly. I can tell they're just lying, or they're, it's great. It's always great all the time. No, it's a wonderful place to work, and I think you should really want. Lacks so much genuine heart behind those answers. I think it'd be very easy to go, this is not someone I want to work for. But someone who's willing to say, it's really hard sometimes when I feel like there's a lack of communication at times where I don't know why we do what we do, and I believe that my boss is great, but I also recognize that sometimes they could be better at communicating that. Wow, what an honest answer! What a genuine, vulnerable, authentic answer. And if they're willing to be authentic and genuine and vulnerable about those things, they're certainly going to be willing to do those things for me as an employee versus just a stranger sitting in their office interviewing. So I think those are moments in time where you can go, oh, this is someone that I can trust, I can work for, and they'll come alongside. There's a whole lot of other things we could talk about with that, but I think great leadership is number one. Number two thing to keep in mind when you're looking for a great job, especially as a young employee early in your career, is after great leadership or a great boss is great product market fit. Does the product you're trying to sell, and this is for a salesperson in particular, that's the world I'm in. So does a product you're trying to sell just resonate right now? It's a great product. People want it. People love it. And it solves a real problem right now. Number three, and this has to do with that product market fit, it is selling. So there is evidence of product traction. The demand is there. The growth is, you're seeing the growth take off. I think you want to be part of a rocket ship. You want to be part of an organization that's growing quickly, not just because it's going to be successful and you're going to be successful, but because the things you're going to learn, to the point we had made earlier, at a $10 million, $50 million, $100 million stage as a business, as it grows, the learnings you're going to get and receive in that environment are going to be so much more significant for you than if it was a stagnant, large company that's not really growing that much. I think it's a really exciting thing to be part of a high growth organization. And number four, I would say with that hyper growth or with that significant growth opportunity comes, number four, a great opportunity for you as an employee to take on more responsibility and prove your capability, prove your worth beyond your mere job description. And so that ability to flex and try new things and fail and succeed and innovate. And I think that gives you that environment to be successful. So if I boil it down, it's four things. One, great leadership. Two, great product market fit. Three, great evidence of product traction in the market. And then number four, the ability to take on more responsibility and go beyond your job description.
I completely agree. And I think that's very nicely summarized list. One thing that I would like to just say that, especially in early stage career, do not be scared to say no to a job if it doesn't align with what you're looking for. Because I think a lot of people, like you said, if you see it ticks all of the list in all of the boxes in your list, and you think it's like, oh, I need to take this because it's important, incredible opportunity. But if it doesn't align with what you actually really feel about, if it doesn't align with your values,
of course,
don't be scared to say no, because I know a lot of people who jump into the ship just because it's the best job, but it might be completely wrong for yourself, and then you realize that you're actually more miserable than you should be in that position.
100%. Totally agree with that. And I would say that is the foundation. Find an organization that aligns with your passions, your purpose, your mission in life. And then after that, that's when you start looking at the other four through that lens.
Perfect. I know I'm keeping you for quite a long time, so I'm going to ask a couple more questions.
Sure.
One of them is, obviously you have extremely demanding career. You have a podcast on the side. You're a keynote speaker as well. How do you maintain a healthy work-life balance yourself, Joel?
It's a good question. I would say I didn't for a lot of my career. That's a vulnerable answer. I didn't. It really negatively impacted my romantic relationships. It really negatively impacted my relationship with my kids. It was problematic. And I think what has been evident for me in the last 24 months, for sure the last 12, is that I'm able to maintain work-life balance, which, by the way, I think we just have life. We happen to work within our life. But I'm able to balance the responsibilities and passions in my life when those passions or responsibilities are complementary. For example, I do podcasts every week. And so doing this one with you is just another hour on the same topics I already talk about. I didn't really prepare for this conversation. This isn't work for me. This is life-giving. And in fact, it's actually going to make me better because I have these things in the forefront of my mind now moving throughout my day. And these things that we talked about today will be guiding principles that will continue to shape the way I lead my own team. In fact, I have a one-on-one with one of my team members in 4 minutes. So I think it's less work and it's easier to have balance when the things that you're doing are complementary to one another and inform one another versus being fractured. If I had like a side hustle of creating a local cleaning company, and then over here I was speaking, and over here I was trying to become a computer programmer, that's hard. But all the things I'm now doing are fairly complementary.
And finally, what parting thoughts or advice would you like to share with our listeners? Probably the hardest question of the whole 1 hour.
I always ask this question to my guests too, and I should have been prepared. I would say don't forget about the impact that you can make on anyone's life individually every single day. You have an opportunity to leave people better than you found them. The way you treat the barista at Starbucks, when you go in and look them in the eye and say, "How are you doing today? You having a good day? Has it been a good shift so far?" When's the last time anyone asked that barista how she's doing? And she's always asking her customers. She might be having a bad day. And I've asked that question and I've seen tears well up in their eyes because someone actually cared to ask. And back to leadership, maybe their own manager hadn't asked them that question that day. The impact you have on your mailman when you greet them at the door and take the mail from their hands and go, "Hey, I really appreciate you." And the way you just continue to show up day after day, even when it's pouring rain outside. Thank you for that. The way you treat everyone around you every day can make an impact on their lives in ways you'll never know. And yet can transform communities, can transform relationships, can transform everything about that person for that moment in time. And if we all did that every day, if we all saw individual interactions with someone, myself and you right now, Vicky, as an opportunity to leave that person better than we found them, I think that could really change the world.
I have goosebumps on my arms after this advice. So it's definitely resonating with me. And I really think it's going to resonate with a lot of people. How our listeners can connect with you, Joel?
Yeah, so I think the two best ways are one, LinkedIn, Joel Onyshuk, JoelOnyshuk. I'm on there a lot. I post daily. I'm always interacting with folks in my LinkedIn messages. And then you can find me on my website as well, wewantimpact.com. Or email me at joel@wewantimpact.com. That would be great.
Perfect. I will add all of the links in the description below so everyone can connect with you and find you. But for now, thank you so much for being with us today, Joel. It was absolutely fantastic conversation. And I really hope to speak with you soon.
Thanks, Vicky. It's been a pleasure to meet you and enjoy your night.